now more than ever, people need to go within and plug into that cellular memory, plug into divine source, detach as much as possible from the matrix. Hello again, everybody. This is James Bartley, and you're listening to Bartley's commentaries on the cosmic wars. Well, there's a lot to talk about today. Interesting developments. I do believe a sleeping giant has been awakened. I'll talk more about that. It started pretty much with Officer Greg Anderson, police officer with the Seattle Port Authority, or at any rate, the Port Authority of Washington State. He spoke out. Greg Anderson was Army Ranger veteran, fought in Ramadi, Iraq, and he's gone out public with videos talking about how many of his fellow officers all across America are just trampling over people's constitutional rights and following illegal orders and basically acting like mindless thugs on behalf of their masters at the expense of the American people who they're supposed to be serving. And not surprisingly, Officer Greg Anderson was fired. Since then, and even before then, other law enforcement individuals, some of whom have former recent combat experience, as well as former combat veterans who are business owners and have had their businesses shut down and have been harassed because they try to keep their businesses going. They've been speaking out. I'll talk about that because that's a very good development, the way I see it. It means that the American people, many of the hardcore, true constitutionalist Americans, are starting to flex their muscles. And that's not a good development for the would-be controllers. I'm also going to talk about a few other issues. The U.S. is starting to cause more problems for Venezuela and Iran. They're threatening to interdict oil tankers from Iran to Venezuela, and they justify it counter-narcotics, counter-terrorism, of course, but really just piracy on the high seas if it comes to that. In their never-ending quest for global domination, not only are they not content with what's going on domestically with all the restrictions and the shutdowns and deliberate destruction of the world global economy, but they are hell-bent on starting, or rather expanding, these wars to include Iran and China. There's also been ongoing developments vis-a-vis the Chinese, and I'll be talking about that. I'll also be talking about the DARPA vaccine. That's right, you heard that right. There's this biotech company called Moderna, and their head scientist is an Israeli citizen, and they are one of the front runners for coming out with a vaccine for the COVID-19, and apparently they'd received funding from DARPA, the Gates Foundation, and they are really pushing the RNA aspect of the vaccine, how it will literally rewrite the genetic codes of the subjects who received the vaccination. I'll be talking about that and a lot of other things. Got a lot of catching up to do, actually. As far as waking up the sleeping giant, interesting developments. Let me tell you about what's happened to an individual named Nick Kamalatsos. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. He's ex-recon Marine, Marine recon, ex-Marine Raider. In fact, if you go to one of his YouTube channels, he goes into detail explaining the differences between Marine recon and the Marine Raiders, and he should know because he was both, right? Long story short, like many people, his business has suffered. His businesses has suffered as a result of these restrictions. And he decided to open up his gym again and give people a place to go to work out their frustrations, exercise, etc. And before too long, the police in North Carolina began harassing him, uh, like barging into his gym, coming in through multiple entrances, threatening uh, the the people working out. Uh, Cops had their hands on their firearms, acting all thuggish and brutish, and the whole idea was all about intimidation. And they were threatening to cite everyone that was there, and they were threatening to cite and ticket the owner of the gym, Nick Kamalatzos. And so Nick has been very vocal in the recent past talking about this, and also talking about how the COVID-19 cases, the incidence rates, they just don't add up. Like many other people, the numbers that the media is throwing at us just doesn't make sense whatsoever. So he decided to open his gym again. And from what I understand, Nick also teaches like military style courses too. So that's maybe another reason why he was on their radar. But I think that even if he didn't do that, if he just operated a gym, they would have harassed him anyway. These commie socialist cops. So Nick Kamalatzos, and I'll have a link to his website, rather his YouTube channels, is talking about what's been going on with him. We've had the incident with Officer Greg Anderson of the Seattle Port Authority, who's been fired from his job. He was an ex-Army Ranger, served and fought in Ramadi, and now other cops have come out and have spoken out about this, and many of them are citing the Constitution. Many of them are talking about how the official narrative needs to be questioned, that people have the right to do their own research and find out what the hell is really going on, instead of just going along with the lamestream narrative. So the point of relevance of all this, folks, is that people like Nick Kamalatzos and others, they have a very large following. There's a lot of people out there that have a general interest in all things military, especially combat, especially special forces. So I bet it's an eye-opener for a lot of the people that frequented his YouTube channel just to get the military intel dumps, insight from an ex-Marine Special Operations guy. And now the same guy is talking about, the cops just coming around and harassing him and basically trying to ruin his business and ruin his livelihood. That's going to wake up a lot of people. A lot of people that may have just gone along with the mainstream narrative. People that by nature are kind of order followers, or by nature don't really question what the master authority figures say. Now they're confronted with the spectacle of one of their iconic figures. In this example, Nick Kamalatzos, ex-Marine Special Operations guy, U.S. Marine, talking about how the numbers for coronavirus don't make sense, talking about how there is such a low incidence rate, a low fatality rate, and how the numbers are being overinflated by the hype and the media frenzy. And a lot of people who go to Nick Kamalatzos' site for military information and for workout information, they're going to get their eyes opened, because one of their icons is now speaking out about this. And Greg Anderson talked about when he went public, Officer Greg Anderson, and did that video, that many fellow law enforcement people from across America contacted him and offered him encouragement and support. So what we're seeing here is a definite pushback from constitutionally minded law enforcement officers, LEOs. And there's plenty of them out there in the sheriff's departments and in the police departments. Definitely there's a lot of whack job psychopaths, serial dog killers in law enforcement, because it's all been Israeliized, if that's if that's even proper grammatical usage. They've systematically made a point of recruiting unstable, uh, power mad control freaks, and they've filled the ranks of law enforcement agencies around America and indeed around the world with these types. Always remember, folks, well, you guys know, you guys and gals, because you just know these things, that this is ultimately non-human. This social distancing stuff, this cover your face with a mask stuff, eyes wide shut fashion, uh, teaching kids, now that they're letting some of them back to school, social distancing, where they're supposed to play but not too close to each other. All that is non-human, inhuman crap, and I just have to laugh at these surface level truthers that go, "Oh, the next thing is a fake alien invasion." Where have you been? This whole planet is, or this part of the galaxy, perhaps, is under the dominion of reptilians and working through the reptilian human hybrids here on Earth. And these reptilian human hybrids that we see in front of us, they're everywhere. They're these crazed cops, these crazed bureaucrats, these crazed news media presenters. It's a they live, it's equal parts a they live scenario and an idiocracy scenario, actually, is what it amounts to. And that's where we're at. So to say that, oh, the next thing is going to be a fake alien invasion, the invasion happened a long time ago. The aliens, if you want to call them that, have created this dystopic, loosh feeding terrarium. I mean, they might as well put a big dome over this place and make it just so obvious. I mean, it's obvious to us. But when you see it at this level, the Sovietized, collectivized malice model just in your face everywhere you look, and then the sheeple just going along with it, and then the sheeple have now been mobilized. California openly said that they're going to recruit thousands of people to be tracers to track down people who've been exposed to COVID-19. So if you remember in the days of Obama, people were worried about the Obama force that would be created of all these loyal Obama fanatics. Well, whether those types wound up in Black Lives Matter or what, I don't know. But the the Soviet the Soviet mindset, the social justice warrior mindset, the communist mindset is now well embedded in American and Western culture, and it's like a force multiplier. They're there to give you dirty looks if you get too close to them in a public place, or perish the thought. You cough or you sneeze, or if you have asthma and you use your inhaler in public. Ooh, what's that guy? Well, it's called an inhaler. The guy's probably got asthma. Okay, so don't freak out about it, moron. But getting back to Nick Camalazzo's Officer Greg Anderson and others like them, there's many law enforcement people like them who have an ex-military background, who've been in actual combat, who've seen the worst of combat in crappy places to fight a war, like Afghanistan and or Iraq. Some veterans have fought in both theaters. And then they come back as a law enforcement person, but they still have morals, they still have ethics. But on the other hand, they've been at the sharp end. They've been in a kill or be killed situation. They've done things that people who have not been in combat cannot even fathom, because it's an entirely different universe. The things that these combat veterans have to do in order to survive and maintain their wits and then maintain their sanity. And because the skills are transferable, many of them wind up becoming, it's a natural transition, law enforcement officers. You see the same thing in military aviation. If a military pilot is going to come to an end in his military career, well, he wants to continue flying and he wants to make a living doing it. Where is he going to go? He's going to go to the airlines. He's going to go to the airlines or the air freight cargo transport companies that fly freight around all over the place, or become a contract mercenary, flying for like Air America or something. Who knows? But the pilots will go after the military careers are over to a place where they can continue to fly because they love doing it and they want to make a living out of doing it. Same thing with a lot of these military people, ex-military people, especially those with combat experience. Many of them wind up in law enforcement. And some of them, a great many of them actually, they really take to heart the tenets of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. We saw this, now it's been, go back to the 90s at least, when this questionnaire, and some of you know what I'm talking about, what I'm leading up to, this questionnaire was circulated amongst Marines at 29 Palms, and in Las Vegas, where there's a Marine contingent there, and in where else? I think Camp Pendleton and around the Barstow area. But at any rate, this questionnaire went out, and it was asking them things. Would you be willing to disarm Americans of their firearms? Would you be willing to fire on your fellow Americans? Shoot fellow Americans? Would you be willing to serve under foreign command? Right? Now, a close personal friend of mine was working in a library, essentially as a librarian in Las Vegas, when this questionnaire went out. And she told me personally that swarms, hordes of U.S. Marines came into the library asking to see copies of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, because they were shaken up by the questionnaire that went out. Like they were testing the waters, seeing what they're willing to do. And that was decades ago now. And here we are, fast forward. There's been a lot of warfare and combat in the meantime. And not just in Iraq and Afghanistan, but in Somalia, in Sudan, in the Philippines. I mean, all over the world. This, I don't want to say bogus war on terror, because it's not bogus to the innocent victims, civilian victims, and those in the military who joined the military for altruistic reasons, right? Well, they've been forced, many of them forced to take part in constant combat for a long time now. So there's a lot of these combat veterans with a constitutional mindset, Bill of Rights mindset, stand up and protect the Constitution from enemies, foreign and domestic mindset in law enforcement. And they're found throughout American society. I mean, there's countless Americans out there. Well, I mean, I'm from the desert Southwest, essentially. Southern California, Arizona, Nevada, and you just see a lot of old vets walking around with their Second Amendment T-shirts and Right to Bear Arms T-shirts, and they're everywhere. And the controllers know there's going to be a attrition factor. They know a lot of these mindless order following cops are going to be killed, basically, because what they want, and I think it's going to backfire on them. They want a civil war, and Masaki Miyagawa and I were talking about this. And Masaki made the point that there are aspects of this pandemic, if you want to call it that, and that's a good name for it, actually. You go watch my video, the video of me giving a lecture in 2007 Roswell, talking about reptilians. I say in that video the possibility sometime down the track of a pandemic, a release of a bioweapon, real or contrived, right? That it's one of the things which can hold an entire planet in thraldom. It is shunting everyone in the reptilian brain of fear and aggression, fear and suggestibility, and that's where we're at now. So there are countless Americans out there that will rise up. The controllers want there to be a bloody civil war, and they don't care how many cops and National Guardsmen get killed in the process. Heck, they've been killing off all these American and British and Australian, New Zealand and Danish and German troops for when 9/11 happened, 2001, and this war on terror never seems to. Strangely enough, there hasn't been many overt acts of terrorism lately. Okay, because the controllers of doing everything they're doing has shifted over to this coronavirus thing. But one of the ways the controllers have tried to offset the fact that they are going to lose a lot of law enforcement, and when you look at some of the video, like the video of the police captain that keeps harassing Nick, the ex U.S. Marine raider, for opening his gym, right? The guy's fat and he's out of shape. A guy like that probably wouldn't last a day in urban street fighting, like Greg Anderson had to do in Ramadi, Iraq, 2004, 2005. I mean, urban fighting, street fighting is some of the worst fighting there can be, because behind every pile of rubble is a potential shooter or a sniper, and this is the era of IEDs, right? So these soldiers and Marines and engineers and whatnot, I mean, not only are they trying to avoid getting their heads blown off, they're trying to avoid stepping on a mine and getting blown to pieces. So they're hyper alert. They've had to tune their senses to a degree which even your average cop on the beat can't fathom. Because a cop can just drive around in a car, pull over to a donut place and grab some donuts and then sit there and munch on them, whatever. You can't do that in Fallujah or some of these places, Musa Kala in Afghanistan, Tarin Kaut, Kajaki. You get blown up, you get shot. Someone will fire an RPG at you or a 107 millimeter rocket round. So how the controllers aim to get around the attrition factor of all these out of shape cops that have no concept of urban street fighting, and also, let alone all the wilderness in America, all the wilderness, right? I mean, there are people that have just grown up in the woods and fishing and living off the land. That's what they do. I mean, the transition for someone like Carlos Hathcock, the great Marine sniper of the Vietnam War, one of the great Marine snipers of the Vietnam War. I read his book, which is like a Bible to scout snipers in the U.S. Marine Corps. He just went from a good old boy, hunting and fishing, and the next thing you know, I mean, the transition was seamless. Next thing you know, he's an expert sniper, and in Vietnam. That's why they've resorted to, for some time now, recruiting foreign immigrants, putting them in uniform. And they backstab a lot of those guys too. A lot of them have come up from Latin America, come up from Central America. Uh, they tell them, okay, join the U.S. military, you go to combat, and then after, if you survive the ordeal, we'll make you a citizen. Oh, they backstabbed some of those people, didn't give them citizenship, deported them. Don't call us, we'll call you. And they're also going to rely on robotics. If you go to these websites, these futuristic websites, talking about futuristic developments, which are the here and now actually, and you go to the U.S. Army websites and look up their PDFs and their white papers, their training documents online, and they're available online. They're talking about using robots. And I mean, imagine a scenario where you have dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands, of these little tracked robots that just scout the land. They just go out in swarms looking for IEDs, looking for mines, looking for any trace of the enemy, so-called. And as they're moving along, swarms of them, they've got their sensors, and they're sending back telemetry and everything, and back to their controllers, and you have drones overhead, observing their movement down below. And then all these robots, little tracked robots, they come across a river. What'll happen then is all these robots will join up and create a bridge. I mean, that's something right out of Stargate, SG-1, the replicators. But that's what the Army is talking about. Not only that, they're talking about these little robot tracked vehicles in our little robot tracked vehicles in our example, that they're also ordnance. And if they come across an enemy strong point or a place where there's an enemy position, the way they plan it out is these things will rise up, levitate en masse, form up over the enemy position, drop onto it, and detonate, because they make ordnance out of them. And I'll find these links too, these articles and these position papers. They're actually, there's phases and stages of robotics that the Army and the military are going through. And they're saying, in this phase we expect to be at this level, this phase we expect to be at this level, this phase we expect all these little robotic tracked vehicles to join up and form bridges, and then when necessary levitate and position themselves over an enemy position, drop themselves like bombs, and then it goes beyond that. So the point of relevance is they don't care about these order following Stasi communist jackboot cops who get killed in the line of duty. They're just going to replace them. If they're not going to replace them with immigrants, they're going to replace, or convicts, and many of those cops are convicts anyway. And when it comes right down to it, and their behavior, they'll just replace them with robots. That's the plan. But you know what? It's still not going to work, because they're dealing with hundreds of thousands. They're going to be dealing with hundreds of thousands of armed Americans, many of them who've been in combat or have practiced, have gone to some of these courses where they learn, how to survive in a combat environment, an urban environment in a combat scenario. I mean, look, they threw everything they could at the Taliban. The Taliban are still there. The U.S. Military, and before them the French, threw just about everything they had short of nuclear weapons at the first the Viet Minh, then the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong. Didn't matter. You see, the Saker points this out. If you go to his articles on uns.com, a great website, he points out for countries like Iran and Venezuela, they win by surviving. Whatever the Anglo-Zionists throw at them in the form of sanctions, warfare, everything else. If at the end of the day they're still there as an integrated working government and still with the support of the people, it doesn't matter how many casualties they've incurred, because merely by still being there and being defiant, they're winning, right? And that's the problem going forward. I'm going to talk more about this later. That I don't know why anyone nowadays in the military would willingly serve their masters. On top of everything that's going on, they're bound and determined, it seems to me, to get a fight going against China and or Iran and or Russia. And even though it may be scripted, because the way I see these things, folks, is it's a replay of all the Anunnaki wars, Enlil's forces over here, Enki's forces over there. It's the Chinese reptilian hybrids against the Anglo-Zionist reptilian hybrids, and there's some inner linkage between the two. And then you throw in the Russian reptilian hybrids. It's like they're not us, right? We're not ruling this planet. They are, at least for the time being. So it's a replay. It's a modern version of the Wars of Gods and Men. You think about that book that Zecharia Sitchin wrote. It's a good title for it. The Wars of Gods and Humans, using human hybrids and nowadays with advanced robotics and everything, and the ability to don these exoskeletons which give soldiers extreme strength, endurance, agility, leaping ability, all that stuff. Yeah, it's a futuristic battlefield that we're going to find ourselves in. But as Masaki and I talked about, seems to us that the controllers, they didn't plan on some of the things happening that happened, if that makes sense. In their arrogance, they think they can just do whatever they want and then they'll come out smelling like roses. But the fundamental constants are changing. The energy streaming in from the galactic core, the awakening, the exponential increase in self-awareness and a recognition of the nature of this multiple threat environment that has taken root in a lot of people, right? And you go to these websites or you go to these YouTube channels where these cops and these former combat veterans are talking about all this Stalin, Soviet, Maoist crap that's going on. And then you go down, you read all the comments. It's like there's so many people that are writing, saying, "I stand with the Constitution. I swore to uphold and defend the Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic." Countless people writing in, chiming in like that. Even on law enforcement websites, you're seeing these comments. I'm an ex-Marine, and I've swore to uphold and defend the Constitution. That is a variable that they cannot control. Because a lot of these combat veterans, they've seen and done it all. They've had to survive and thrive in places where every step you take could be your last. Not only do they know how to dismantle an IED, they know how to put them together. They know how to make IEDs. And I think at some point, what some of these cops that are speaking out may have to do is some of them may have to form secret cells because I mean, if the end result is every time someone speaks out they get fired, eventually it's like, you have to look at it from a cost benefit analysis standpoint. It's, yeah, they're making a point, but they still have livelihoods and families to feed and all that other stuff. Thankfully, Greg Anderson, they put up a GoFundMe campaign for him, and I really hope that he and others that stand with the Constitution get help and support, because they're standing up for all of us, is what they're doing. And see, this is why, unless I came across a truly obnoxious individual who, was just basically a psychopath who just loved killing, and that's why they joined the military, why I never judged people who went off and fought in these bogus war on terror crap. Even though, I mean, there must have been a lot of people in the military who went into combat knowing that the official 9/11 story was nonsense. There had to be. You can't have that many dumb people, right? Some of them had to know something is fishy about the whole narrative of 9/11. But you know what? They went anyway because, at heart, many of them are warriors. That's what they came into this incarnation to do, right? To be warriors. But if you look at it from that standpoint, where you talk about a potential for blowback, not only was there already a hardcore of sheriffs, and remember, sheriffs have to be elected; they're not just appointed, right? They actually have to win an election, and so it behooves them to operate in consonance with the Constitution and insist that their deputy sheriffs operate the same way. And there have been many sheriffs around America that have been very outspoken about standing up for the Constitution. So even before all these bogus wars on terror started post 9/11, and then before that, you look at the bogus war on drugs. What a joke that is. Who are the biggest drug traffickers after all? The black ops and the major corporations and the major banks that launder the money. So with all these wars that came about as 9/11, out of that you came, a byproduct of that was all these Americans who already had a constitutionalist mindset, a Bill of Rights mindset. Many of them may have been on the fence about 9/11's, official narrative. Many of them were probably believers of the official narrative, but since then they've seen and heard things that made them change their mind. Oh, like Pat Tillman, who was killed off in a so-called friendly fire incident. He was the former Arizona Cardinals football player who, in a fit of patriotism, after 9/11, joined and wound up becoming an Army Ranger. He started to smell a rat before too long, began talking with others, and anyway, you know the story. A lot of you, they killed him off in a friendly fire incident. Point of relevance is there was a lot of people, different levels of understanding about what 9/11 and the war on terror was all about. But the bottom line is, a lot of them, I'm talking about the combat soldiers too, especially, and Marines, they came back with combat experience. And many of them, to this day, swear to uphold and defend the Constitution. And that's a game changer. There's nothing they could do to eradicate that. No amount of censorship, no amount of doubling down on Facebook and on YouTube and all these other Sovietized forms of dissent control, let's call it. They can't change that. It's a spirit. It's a spirit that pervades America. So anyhow, I just wanted to talk about that at length before I go into these other subjects. You've been listening rather to Bartley's commentaries on the cosmic wars. If you like what we do, if you believe in what we do, please go to thecosmicswitchboard.com, sign up and become a member, and we'll see you at the top of the next segment.